Hi everyone, very warm welcome to the first in a series of 3 chef chats that the Chef Manifesto is hosting at this year's AGRF 2021. My name is Paul Newnham. I'm the director of the SDG2 Advocacy Hub and also help facilitate the Chef's Manifesto alongside a team spread around the world. I'm coming to you live from Nairobi, Kenya, and from the AGRF studio here, and it's exciting to be here during this time. Before I turn to the 2 chefs who are joining me today, let me just say a few sentences about the Chef's Manifesto for those who haven't come across our network. So the Chef's Manifesto is a chef-led network bringing together 1,000+ chefs from 90 countries, and they're all gathering together to help drive and deliver a sustainable food system. There's 1 in 3 people malnourished globally and damaging food production systems. Chefs, farmers, policymakers, and world leaders need to work together to deliver a sustainable, nutritious, and delicious food future. And chefs really sit between the farm and the fork. The manifesto framework is tied to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and it really connects practical actions such as protection of biodiversity, investment in livelihoods, the celebration of local and seasonal food, and reducing waste and ensuring nutritious food that's accessible and affordable and more. So we have 2 chefs that are joining us today. And so firstly, I'd like to welcome Chef Kiran Jethwa. With us, Chef Kiran is a Kenyan chef, restaurateur, and entrepreneur. He's hosted and presented a plethora of different shows and films, many of which focus on the culinary culture of Africa. Kiran's also particularly interested in engaging commercial ventures to drive zero waste through business solutions. And so Kiran, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you.
No, it's great to have you. And we're also excited to be joined by Chef Scar Motane. Chef Scar studied culinary arts in Johannesburg and today works as a freelance consultant in the food industry. She's also previously worked with the International Fund for Agricultural Development on the Recipes for Change initiative and has been a long-standing member of the Chef's Manifesto. Scar, you focus a lot on sourcing ingredients locally, working closely with smallholder farmers and promoting the native ingredients in Lesotho. And so it's really great to have you, so welcome. Okay, so today's conversation, I'm super excited to hear from you both, and I'm hoping that the audience also might be able to share some questions, and we have a bit of time for that. So if you are listening in today, feel free to use the chat function here on the AGRF platform to ask your questions, and we'll then hope to be able to address some of them as we go forward. So as we start, let's take maybe a minute to think about this year's AGRF theme, which is Pathways to Recovery and Resilient Food Systems. How, from your perspective, do chefs come into this conversation around food systems and their recovery and transformation to become more equitable and resilient? So maybe let's just start there. You know, what do you guys think around this in terms of chefs coming into this conversation? Any opening words? Who wants to go first? Okay, Scar, you're on mute, I think, still. So you need to unmute yourself there, then we can hear you.
Okay, I'll go first.
Great.
It's okay?
Yeah, that's great.
All right, thanks. I don't think we can talk about food systems without talking about the involvement of chefs in the whole mix.
Yeah.
Chefs are in the center of it all. They are the link or the bridge to all the different components that make up a viable food system chain, from production to how the food gets onto our plate. So I do think it's very important that chefs are involved and are included in these conversations.
No, thanks, Chef. Kiran, do you have anything to add?
I mean, personally, I fully agree with that, you know, to a certain extent with the linchpin. And I mean, I think for me, it really comes down to efficient use of what is currently being started, efficient use of what is currently being produced. My head is very much buried in this conversation because I think before we start to look at other initiatives, why don't we just do better with what we're already producing and already doing?
Yeah.
And if we start there, it's like, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's just first of all fix the wheel, and then we can reinvent a wheel if we want to. That's really a big one for me. So for me, that's kind of where it really begins, and where my energy is applied.
Yeah, no, I think, and thank you both. I mean, I think this is a really interesting conversation because, a huge amount of energy, a huge amount of effort goes into producing food globally. And I think we produce enough food to feed the planet 1.5 times. And yet we still have, a huge number of people still not getting the nutrients they need and not getting the food they need. So maybe I'll start with you, Chef Kieran. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, just really around reducing waste and ensuring this nutritious food comes through? So working with kind of what we've got.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I'll come back to again quickly before I go into what you were saying. I mean, we produce enough to feed 1.5 times the planet.
Yeah.
And so, while we have to also change how we produce food because it's not sustainable, we understand that.
Yeah.
That change will take time. It's not going to happen overnight. And so as we transition to better food production, we need to also immediately make better use of what we're growing. That is being stuff that is just not getting to people's mouths every single day. And my work really is about that. It's, I think there's so many figures that are quoted about the waste on farms and the food that is grown that doesn't get to people. The common one is around 30%. I actually believe it's far higher, and I think the figure is underquoted. But it's a conversation for another day. It's still a lot of food. Farm gate waste, if you want to call it that, fit for human consumption. So my work was really, or my work is, and I have a particular venture that's primarily focused on aggregation of this. Kenya is an interesting place because we have a very developed agricultural system or industry here, as well as an enormous amount of people living in the poverty line, the nutrition poverty line, should we say. And so I'm fortunate, I suppose, to be here to be able to uncover the story of this volume of food that's not getting to people who really, really need it, and try and connect the dots. And so the process is simple. It sounds simple, but it isn't. We aggregate, process, and then get to, this is the dream, the vision, get to the people who need the most nutritious food. And I think nutritious food is an extremely important thing. People who are living on the food poverty line currently in this part of the world have access to very poor nutrition. It's sugar and wheat. And we have these huge corporates who should really look at themselves a little bit, producing cheap food, so that they speak to a person's pocket, which ultimately is the primary decision maker in the world. But what they're giving them as food options is horrendous. And we're on a path to non-communicable diseases, and I've heard some figures quoted that should terrify everybody. It's a complex conversation, and there are many elements to it. But ultimately, the people who are going to suffer the most are the people on the food poverty line. All the time, we have really good, nutritious food being grown all around us. It's just not available to them. It's not affordable to them. And if you can connect those dots and then do it through a commercial model, you've got an extremely exciting opportunity to do some really cool stuff.
Yeah. No, I think as you were speaking, one of the things that I kind of came to mind for me is seeing food as part of a system. I think most people, they see food, fruits and vegetables like this in a supermarket or on the side of the road. They see, food on a plate, being fed to them that somebody's prepared, either their family or a restaurant or someone. And then they see farms, but there's actually a connection between that farm process of the things growing and then actually ending up on that plate that I think chefs are uniquely placed because you understand how to source, you understand what goes in, the quality, the degradation that happens through transport and, all these elements. And then, even things like energy and the impact of energy and on the cooking process and the refrigeration. So I think this food system conversation, which, you know, this year with the UN Food Systems Summit coming up in just a few weeks, but the conversation leading into that has really brought that to the front. And I think, Kieran, as you're talking, that's what comes to mind. I'm going to go across to you, Chef Scar. So a lot of your work is really centered around biodiversity and diverse ingredients. And this is another component. You know, a lot of our diet is made up from a very narrow group of things. And, you know, as Kieran talked about, you know, cheap food is often made from, you know, 4 to 5 ingredients. And you know, that gives us 60% of the calories that we have in our diet. Yet there's 30,000 edible ingredients globally. And most of us only see like 150 different types of food. So you've done a lot of work on this. Can you just share a little bit more about your projects and why you think it's important for chefs to get involved in this topic, and also networks and how chefs can really drive this? So what's your thoughts, Scar?
Okay, thanks, Paul. Look, upon realizing that our diets are not diverse enough, I initiated some projects in Lesotho, where I'm based, and I have partnered with some locals from villages, and they supply me with indigenous crops around their area. And then I, in turn, take these crops, and then I introduce them to other chefs. I introduce them to restaurants. I introduce them to caterers.
Okay.
And then they actually include them in their menu. They are becoming more creative with recipes on how to cook these very important crops in our country. And I mean, they've even started with like some things like local food Wednesdays and local food Fridays, where they're actually attracting people to come and sample and enjoy our cuisine. And I also do like cooking demonstrations, especially in villages, in the Sesotho language that my people can understand. Yep. And I actually teach them and show them how they can actually eat well using the products and the produce that they have in abundance around their area. So I talk to them about the nutritional content of the food and the ingredients. And basically, that's what I do with them in terms of cooking demonstrations. And look, as well, I mean, through the Chefs Manifesto Network, look, the Chef Manifesto chefs are doing amazing work where they are in their own spaces. And the network actually also allows us to learn from each other. And really, this is very important to all of us as chefs to be able to learn from Chef Kieran, from the other chefs, what they are doing. And then obviously we can also implement the same in their areas.
Yeah, and
our areas.
I think, Scar, you know, what you're saying there is really important, because I think sometimes we can all be looking for like a silver bullet, or we look for, you just do this and we'll solve the problem. But the reality is every context is different. And so, you know, in a restaurant where you're doing more fine dining, it's a very different solution set to you know, maybe a fast casual or something to reach, you know, the broader audience, or a school feeding, and so we all learn from one another. It's good to see that there's some conversations also with our online audience coming in already. Amanda was saying that she's interested in learning more about the nutritional poverty line as a metric. I think, Kieran, you mentioned something about nutritional poverty. You know, that's an interesting concept. I don't know, throwing that to you, just any reflections for Amanda?
I mean, I don't have the figures in front of me as to how it would be classified, but I just think it would probably sit somewhere around the number of calories per day a person is getting and the quality of those calories.
Yep.
And so, you know, it's not just about somebody having spending power.
Yep.
Because you might have money to buy decent food, but that food might not be available to you. So it's not a sort of how much money do you have in your bank. It's just, you know, literally what's your on the nutritional scale, where are you?
Yeah.
From a richness point of view. I mean, I know people in the northern parts, the Asal regions of Kenya, where they might have lots of money from selling miraa, for example. There are kids up there who are making a lot of money from harvesting and selling this crop miraa, which khat, as it's called, I think also.
Okay.
It's chewing tobacco. It's very popular in Somalia. But they have money in their pocket, but no decent food to eat. And so that's maybe one way of how we say nutritional poverty, as opposed to, you know.
No, that's helpful. No, that's really good.
Yeah.
One thing
I just want to
oh,
something that Scar was saying, like, about, I think it's fantastic what you're doing, Scar. Honestly, it's really, it's touched a nerve with me, because one of the TV shows I did way back when was to go around this part of the world and really showcase the quality and variety of ingredients that we have that just don't get any airtime. And then the next step for me was to start implementing and putting these things on the menus in the restaurants. One example is the grasshoppers that you get around Lake Victoria that are eaten in Kampala, like a delicacy. They're utterly delicious. And, I started serving them in the restaurant here and forcing people to eat them. The problem that continuously tripped me up, there's another example, is a prickly pear that we get around Lake Baringo that's beetroot red. It's an incredible thing. We make the most amazing sorbets and sauces, and the color of it and the flavor is incredible. But the supply chain, this is a very, very big problem that we have, that I faced, was actually being able to get enough at the time consistently to then be able to, put it customer facing. And I think there's a big gap and an opportunity possibly for people to look at investing in connecting, in the supply chain, and connecting these producers with the chefs, so that there is a commercial backbone to the entire thing. Because unless producers or farmers or whatever out there in the villages see a commercial opportunity, they're not going to continue with it. Yeah. And that's something that's tripped me up a number of times on a few things. And I think it's just to throw that out there to whoever's listening, that, there's an opportunity to strengthen our food systems through really this particular area.
Yeah. Scar, any reflections? Scar, anything to add? Yeah.
I think, thank you. Chef Kieran, I think you said it all. And I'm really, really amazed, and I commend you, Chef, for all the work that you're doing. That's all I can say. Yeah. For now.
So one thing, as you were talking, there's a question from John I want to come to in a minute, but the first thing I wanted to just sort of talk about, because this is something I'd love to hear both your thoughts on, because the African food story is often framed about being about food security always. And often, globally, it's sometimes shown as, a country where there's hungry people. But you've just both been talking, Kieran, about different ingredients, and Chef Scar about these beautiful ingredients which are highly nutritious, but then also that not necessarily people are using. And this kind of connects a little bit also to the question that John's asking, is how do we build this knowledge sharing between kind of the farmer and the chef who understands this, but also change this narrative around Africa? Like, do you agree that the African narrative should be about food security, or should it be more about celebration, about culture, and how we have a lot to celebrate in the African food story? Who wants to go first?
I'll just jump in. I think absolutely it does. You can't ignore what people are continuously, the current, the poverty and all that, it's there, it's not going away, you can't, it's always going to be part of the conversation. But I think you're 100% right in saying there is another conversation to have in parallel and to drive. And I think how you do it, for me, it does really come down to chefs. I am a chef, so I'm a little bit biased about this, and maybe blinkered. I'm sure people have other ideas, but if you could literally train an army of chefs, for example, to use only local ingredients, and connect them and make connections for them with all these suppliers and vendors and guys who grow things. One day you're going to have an army of these chefs who are in places of influence, working for big hotel chains, restaurant chains, owning their own restaurants, but they'll slowly filter out into the world. And if you can inspire them and teach them, as Scar is doing, how to use these things creatively, you do two things. You do a number of things. You'll mobilize an army of chefs to use local produce, to develop local cuisine, to strengthen the story around culture and all of that. And I think it's a really, another really important part of the puzzle. And for me here in Kenya, there is not, and with no disrespect to any of the institutions that currently exist, anyone who is driving that story from a training perspective. There isn't a culinary institution in Kenya whose primary focus is to do what I just said. Their primary focus is to teach them cordon bleu cooking.
Yeah.
Now France is away from here. You know, we don't really need it, frankly.
Yeah.
And I think it's overrated. There, I said it. But anyway.
No, but this is important. I mean, this is Africa has such rich history, but often it's dominated by these other cultures which have brought in, and we need to change that. And food is a key element that obviously drives that conversation. Scar, Lesotho, is this a similar? I know you've worked with everyone right from the king to everyone in Lesotho in different ways. How is this? Does it, what Kieran's saying resonate? Are there any reflections, ideas, thoughts from Lesotho?
It's basically similar to what is happening in Kenya, like Chef Kieran is saying. Look, I think when we talk about African food, it's all of the above. Everything that you've mentioned, it should be about food security. It should be about the promotion of our African cuisine. It should be about celebrating it. What I have seen when I do this cooking demonstrations, which I do a lot of, especially in villages, I have seen that participants really they are surprised when I teach them and show them about the nutritional content of the food that they have abundance of in their area. So that's another thing that's lacking. People don't know how good they have it, especially in the villages. They don't know about the health benefits of sorghum, for instance,
Yeah.
or of the exotic indigenous greens that they have around their area.
Yeah.
So in turn, they also teach me about what they know about these indigenous crops. So I think that whole partnership of chefs and the locals with their knowledge and me coming on with the cooking will really play an important role in promotion and celebration of our African cuisine.
Yeah, no, and I think this is kind of goes to what John was talking about. He was saying, is there any African platforms or platforms that are developed where you bring the farmer and the chef together as well? So as you said, you're learning about what the local crops are, but then the farmers also, you're teaching, the farmer about what they could be growing or how they could be improving, locally. And I think, with things like climate change happening, with lots of the challenges that we face at the moment, even COVID, all of these crises which have come, there's a lot more we need to kind of improve the efficiency. It circles back a little bit to Kieran, what you were talking about right at the beginning, is that we are growing a lot of food. How are we using that food more effectively? But then I think it's also, how are we also improving the way that we're growing that? Using more indigenous crops will use less water, they'll be more efficient, these kinds of things, but you need the techniques. If you've got a French culinary school teaching you how to cook, then you're going to want ingredients that feature in a French menu and style. And while that might work in parts of Africa, it's not necessarily universal. And so, there's all the diverse parts. So any reflections on that?
I think one thing that's really important is to really, not to bang on about money, but to, especially in this part of the world, you've got to show commercial value and sustainable commercial value to your farmers. Because if you don't, then they don't value it. And there's a big disconnect currently, because the system is so haphazard and so broken that it's very difficult for a chef like me to show commercial value to a farmer in Western Kenya for a certain variety of finger millet that I would love to use instead of arborea rice for a risotto. As a simple example, to have a local finger millet risotto, so to speak. And so until we can start getting the money to flow into their hands and they see value for what they're doing, what farmers will do is ultimately grow what they can sell, which currently is the big 4, 5, or 6, so they can have a living. And so somehow we need to think about, invest in, and initiate program businesses, whatever you want to call them, that get to that. Because until you do that, it just doesn't make a difference.
Yeah.
The guys that have to live, we have to understand that. People have to put food on their own tables. And they're doing it because the system that we currently have forces them to grow a limited number of crops. And destroy our biodiversity.
Absolutely. I mean, connected to this topic around food narratives is, also, the conversation about gender and women involved. And I know, Sky, you were talking just before about teaching women or going to the village and working with women. Often women are farming, they're driving the farm, but they're also driving what's prepared. Do you have any reflections just around that narrative? How can we work better with women in the African food scene? And from a chef perspective, do you have any reflections on that as well?
Yes, thanks, Paul. Look, my take is empowering women is directly investing in the youth. Most households in Lesotho, especially in the rural areas, are women-headed.
Yeah.
They're always looking for ways to make income. They're always looking for ways to feed their families. We learn from them. I mean, how many times have you heard, I learned this from my mother, or I learned this, or my grandmother used to do it this way.
Yep.
So these are the people that we look up to. So it's very important that they are empowered. They're very important in our society. And they need to be empowered, whether it's through training workshops,
Yep.
on farming, on cooking, on finances.
Yep.
And also, I think financial institutions need to step up and find ways to provide them affordable credit for startups in whatever they're doing.
Absolutely. Well, we're coming to our time, but I've just got a couple of questions that are coming in. There's one, and so we'll just get a couple of quick reflections. So how do you guys handle, and maybe this is for you, Kieran, how do you handle food waste in your kitchen and ensuring food waste, not too much food is wasted? Have you got a couple of comments on that?
I mean, look, in commercial restaurants that are well run, it's built into the business from day one. It has been forever. That's just about managing your food cost. That's more a commercial, it's a small restaurant. We make sure we throw away as little as possible. We use everything. It's nose to tail across the board. I mean, that probably started happening in my business before I started having this conversation about actual food waste. So I don't think it's, for me, how do I put this? It's just something that was built into the business from day one,
Yep.
but it was a commercially driven thing. I wasn't thinking about it from the food waste perspective. I was like, let me use everything as efficiently as possible so I have a successful business. So when I got out and started, looking at what was actually going on farms and stuff and realizing what was not getting to my kitchen, that's when I triggered a nerve with me and I was like, okay, this is enormous and horrendous. So, I think, I don't know if I've answered that question, but that would be my reflection.
Yeah, I think you have. I mean, when I was even with a group of chefs the other day just in London, and they were one of the senior chefs who's one of the senior trainers at Cordon Bleu, he was like telling the chefs, he said, this is money. Like anything that doesn't get used from this is money. It's profit. And you're running a business, and if you do that, it means you're not going to be profitable. Like the fillets of a fish are they just pay for the fish, but it's what you do with all the other elements that actually gives you the profit. And I think people often don't think about that, and I think that is a training thing. But I think sometimes the commercial pressures to make cheaper food, more of it, that kind of thing can drive that. But that's a different style of pressure. But look, we're coming to the end. I'd love to just get any final comments from you both. This has been really interesting. We've covered a lot of ground, but just any final comments for the AGRF community, just from your chef perspective. Maybe to you first, Scar.
Okay. Just to conclude, I would say myself as a chef, I'm really interested and would love to be part of these conversations. What we are talking about now in terms of the resilience of our food systems, it's something that I really, really want to get involved in. And I would just say to all the organizers and everybody that look, even in future, I think it's important that they invite us, and we really want to be part of the solution. Thank you.
Thanks, Chef. Kieran?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the power of chefs is not to be underestimated, and I think we have to change the perception of why we are here. For a long time, media has pushed fancy food, the most creative, innovative, like all that sort of stuff. And that's kind of the thing that chefs really aspire to, and the accolades that we get for them. And maybe we should start thinking about ourselves as an army of people who can really help save the planet before we can start putting fancy food on plates. You can have fancy food on plates and still save the planet. Let's maybe champion people who are doing more of that than the other. I think for a long time, the culinary scene has been about all this excellence and stars and Michelin and all this sort of stuff. Maybe the star should be given for other things.
Yeah.
That would be my wish.
Thank you. Well, thank you guys, and thank you to our audience for joining, and especially again to Chef Scar and Chef Kieran for your time and amazing inspirational stories and insights. I love this idea of resetting the conversation and seeing chefs as key actors in saving the planet. And I'd love to see that be something that really shifts to. So if you're interested in finding out more about the Chef's Manifesto, you're a chef, or I'm sure you all know a chef that's keen to join, feel free to check out chefsmanifesto.com, follow our social channels at Chef's Manifesto. We've got 2 more of these chef chats to come. We're not going to be here tomorrow, but on Thursday and Friday, so the 9th and 10th of September, we'll be welcoming another 4 great chefs to chat about all things sustainability, food systems, and chefs working on driving good food for all. So thank you, everyone. Really great to be with you at AGRF, and thank you once again to Chef Kieran and Chef Scar.
Oh, oh.